Did you know a surgeon is legally required to stop your operation if a tiny cotton sponge goes missing? Modern medicine is governed by a hidden world of regulations so baffling they sound like they were drafted by a hallucinating bureaucrat. Today, we are exposing 50 of the most bizarre, ridiculous, and insane rules doctors and nurses must follow. I promise, after this, you will never look at a hospital or your doctor the exact same way again. 1. You might think those brightly colored rubber clogs are the universal uniform of healthcare workers, but in many surgical wards, wearing Crocs with holes in the top is a fireable offense. It is not a fashion police intervention, though arguably it should be. The holes pose a massive biohazard risk. Imagine a dropped scalpel or a sudden splash of questionable bodily fluids finding its way through those little ventilation gaps directly onto a surgeon's sock. Suddenly, those breathable shoes do not seem like such a genius footwear choice anymore. 2. Pilots have strict laws banning them from flying if they are too tired, but surgeons are often legally exempt from fatigue regulations that apply to truck drivers. A resident doctor can be forced to work up to 28 hours straight with minimal breaks, making life-or-death decisions while hallucinating from exhaustion. It is a terrifying double standard where the person flying your plane is more scrutinized for sleep than the person cutting open your heart. 3. In several jurisdictions, doctors are coached aggressively by hospital lawyers never to say the word sorry to a patient, even if they genuinely feel bad about a negative outcome. Saying "I am sorry" is often interpreted by bloodthirsty malpractice attorneys as a legally binding admission of guilt rather than a basic expression of human empathy. So, if a doctor seems incredibly cold and robotic after giving you bad news, they might just be terrified of losing their medical license over a polite apology. 4. Wearing your signature designer perfume to a nursing shift is strictly prohibited, turning hospitals into entirely scent-free zones. This is not because management hates joy, but because a shockingly high number of patients have severe respiratory issues or chemical sensitivities. A few sprays of an expensive floral fragrance can literally trigger a lethal asthma attack in a vulnerable patient down the hall. So, the ultimate hospital scent is simply the harsh, unromantic aroma of bleach and sterile alcohol pads. 5. Writing patient notes in red ink is universally forbidden across the medical field. A rule that sounds like an elementary school teacher's pet peeve, but has serious consequences. Red ink does not photocopy well, often completely disappearing when documents are faxed or scanned to other departments. Plus, historically, red was reserved exclusively for marking allergies or highlighting life-threatening alerts. Imagine a doctor casually writing down your lunch order in red, triggering a massive panic that you are going into cardiac arrest. 6. In many states, a nurse can spend 12 hours fighting to save a life, but they are often legally powerless to declare when one has ended. Even if the heart monitor has flatlined and the situation is undeniable, strict protocol frequently demands they page a doctor to officially confirm the obvious. The physician might be asleep or across the hospital, meaning everyone stands around in a bizarre legal limbo, waiting for a signature. It turns a profound moment into a paperwork delay, proving that bureaucracy respects no boundaries, not even the final one. 7. Keeping a cup of coffee at the nurse's station is a severe violation of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration regulations. This federal agency classifies the central desk as a clinical area, meaning open beverages are treated like potential biological hazards. If an inspector spots a latte next to a computer monitor, the hospital gets slapped with a massive financial penalty. Medical staff are forced to hide their life-saving caffeine stashes in break rooms, sneaking sips like teenagers hiding contraband from their parents. 8. Doctors and nurses are legally forbidden from discussing anything related to work while riding in a hospital elevator, even if the car appears completely empty. The walls are notoriously thin, and security cameras or hidden microphones might pick up a casual conversation about a patient's weird rash. This strict interpretation of privacy laws means elevator rides in hospitals are often the most incredibly awkward, silent experiences imaginable. They are just professionals staring intensely at the ceiling, pretending the outside world does not exist. 9. Sporting a luxurious, bushy beard is strictly against the rules for anyone working in an infectious disease ward or intensive care unit. This mandate forces male doctors to maintain a clean-shaven face, but not for aesthetic reasons. It is all about the N95 respirator mask. A thick layer of facial hair breaks the airtight seal against the skin, allowing microscopic pathogens a free pass straight into the doctor's lungs. It is a tough choice between maintaining personal style and inhaling a highly contagious airborne virus. 10. Surgeons are aggressively trained to completely override their natural human reflexes and never, under any circumstances, try to catch a falling instrument. If a razor-sharp scalpel slips off the operating table, the strict protocol is to step back and let it hit the floor. Trying to catch it midair usually results in a severed tendon in the surgeon's hand, instantly ending their career and creating a second medical emergency in the same room. Have you ever tried to fight your own basic instincts while standing over an open surgical incision? 11. Have you ever noticed that surgical scrubs are almost always a specific shade of green or blue? This is not a fashion statement, but a mandatory rule based on visual trickery. If a surgeon stares at red blood and organs for hours and then looks at a white wall, their brain creates a green ghost image that distracts them. Green scrubs effectively cancel out this optical illusion, keeping their vision sharp. It turns out that interior design principles are actually a critical part of keeping you alive on the operating table. 12. Bringing a bouquet of fresh flowers to a loved one in the intensive care unit is a classic movie trope. But in real life, it is strictly forbidden. The flowers themselves are fine, but the standing water in the vase is a microscopic breeding ground for Pseudomonas aeruginosa, a nasty bacterium that can kill a patient with a weakened immune system. Nurses are forced to act as floral bouncers, confiscating your thoughtful gift at the door to prevent an accidental biological attack on the ward. 13. The classic image of a doctor wearing a silk tie is effectively banned in many modern hospitals, and the reason is disgusting. Research revealed that ties are almost never washed and dangle directly into open wounds when a doctor leans forward. They act as a fuzzy superhighway for bacteria to travel from one patient to another. So, that distinguished fashion accessory is technically a biohazard. It forces doctors to choose between looking sharp and not accidentally dipping their clothing into your internal organs. 14. Before any knife touches skin, the entire surgical team must perform a mandatory timeout. Everyone stops what they are doing, the music is turned off, and they verbally agree on the patient's name and exactly which body part they are about to cut open. It sounds incredibly elementary, like checking attendance in kindergarten, but this ritual is legally required to prevent wrong-site surgery. It is a terrifying admission that without this rule, highly trained experts might accidentally remove the wrong kidney. 15. You can tip your waiter, your taxi driver, and your hairstylist, but trying to tip your doctor or nurse is a major ethical violation that they must refuse. Hospitals have strict anti-bribery policies, and accepting cash can be construed as a conflict of interest or a kickback for preferential treatment. The best they can accept is a box of donuts to share with the staff. Be honest, if you could slip a surgeon an extra $100 to ensure a neater scar, would you do it? 16. The rise of social media has created a minefield of privacy rules that can get medical staff fired instantly. A nurse cannot even take an innocent selfie in the break room if a patient's file or a monitor with a name on it is visible in the background reflection. Even posting a story about a difficult patient without using names is a violation if the details are specific enough for someone to identify them. Your privacy rights are so strong that they essentially erase the staff's online existence during working hours. 17. Perhaps the most disturbing property law involves your own cells. Thanks to a Supreme Court ruling, once tissue is removed from your body during surgery, you no longer legally own it. If a doctor discovers your cells have a unique genetic mutation that can cure diseases, the hospital can patent your DNA and make billions of dollars without paying you a single cent. It establishes a legal precedent where you are the source of the gold mine, but the hospital owns the pickaxe and the profits. 18. During flu season, many hospital systems enforce a strict jab or mask policy. Healthcare workers must either prove they have received the flu vaccine or wear a surgical mask for every single second of their shift, often for months on end. It is a visual scarlet letter that tells patients exactly who declined the shot. Management frames it as patient safety, while some staff see it as public shaming. Where do you stand on this? Is it a necessary safety measure or an overreach of employer power? 19. The rules around dating patients are clearer than a sterile window. Absolutely not. The American Medical Association states that romantic relationships with current patients are unethical due to the power imbalance. In psychiatric care, this ban often extends indefinitely, meaning a therapist can lose their license for dating a former patient even years after treatment ends. It turns the medical profession into a lonely club where finding love requires checking a discharge date and waiting a mandatory cooling-off period. 20. For decades, doctors were famous for their illegible handwriting, but several states have now effectively outlawed the pen. Laws in places like New York mandate that all prescriptions must be transmitted electronically to prevent errors caused by bad penmanship. The classic scribble that looked like a seismograph reading during an earthquake is now a relic of the past. Pharmacists no longer have to be code breakers, proving that sometimes the best rule is simply taking the pen out of the doctor's hand entirely. 21. In the high-stakes world of the emergency room, there is one word that is strictly treated as a curse: quiet. If a nurse or doctor dares to say, "It sure is quiet in here," they are immediately shunned or verbally reprimanded by the entire staff. The superstition is so intense that medical professionals genuinely believe this specific adjective summons a chaotic wave of bus crashes and cardiac arrests within minutes. It is less about science and more like a tribal ritual where highly educated experts are terrified of a single vocabulary word jinxing their shift. 22. Perhaps the most infuriating rule in American healthcare involves skin-to-skin contact fees. After a C-section, if a mother wants to hold her own newborn baby against her chest, the hospital is legally allowed to charge a specific fee for that moment. The administrative justification is that a nurse must be present in the room to ensure the infant's safety during the bonding time, but to the rest of the world, it looks like a tax on hugging your own child. Do you think this is a necessary safety protocol or just a heartless way to squeeze more money out of new parents? 23. In every surgery, the staff is legally mandated to perform a sponge count at least 3 times. If one small piece of gauze goes missing, the surgeon is legally forbidden from closing the incision. This leads to frantic scenes where world-class doctors are digging through trash cans to find a stray bit of cotton worth 5 cents. The law is so strict that if the count doesn't match, the hospital must pause and call for an X-ray to prove the sponge isn't still inside you. Is this a necessary safety protocol or just the most expensive game of hide-and-seek on Earth? 24. While the rest of the world moved on to smartphones 15 years ago, doctors are often contractually obligated to carry pagers. These ancient plastic bricks are still the primary mode of communication in many top-tier hospitals because their radio frequency penetrates thick, lead-lined walls better than modern cellular signals. It creates a bizarre time warp where a neurosurgeon uses a multi-million-dollar robotic arm to operate on your brain, but relies on 1990s technology to know when to show up for work. 25. There is a bizarre rule known as the Rule of Two that forbids a surgeon from operating alone on certain high-risk procedures, even if they are the world's leading expert. It demands a second qualified surgeon be scrubbed in just to stand there and watch. This luxury spectator is often billing thousands of dollars per hour to literally do nothing but exist as a legal safety net. It is the most expensive babysitting gig in history, proving that sometimes the law trusts redundancy more than genius. 26. Surgeons must follow the hands above the waist rule, which treats the operating room like a game of the floor is lava. Once a surgeon is scrubbed in, Keeping their hands above waist level is mandatory because anything lower is considered a dirty zone. If they absent-mindedly drop their hands to their sides to rest for a second, they have broken the sterile field and must leave to re-scrub completely. It forces them to walk around like a T-Rex for hours just to avoid invisible bacteria. 27. Believe it or not, the medical industry is the last stronghold of the fax machine. Due to complex and outdated interpretations of privacy laws like HIPAA, emailing patient records is often considered a security risk, while faxing them is legally deemed safe. This means critical, life-saving information is being transmitted over screeching phone lines on paper that curls up and fades. Doctors are forced to rely on technology that belongs in a museum because the law hasn't caught up with modern encryption standards. 28. If you have a "do not resuscitate" tattoo on your chest, doctors are legally required to ignore it and break your ribs performing CPR anyway. A tattoo is not considered a valid legal document because it's not notarized, and you can't prove you weren't drunk when you got it. This leads to the absurd reality where a doctor can see your permanent ink screaming, "No CPR," in giant block letters. But they must follow the rulebook and save your life against your illustrated wishes until they see the actual paperwork. 29. Medical residents often face an unspoken elevator rule, where they are strictly forbidden from using the lifts if they are going up less than 2 or 3 floors. While the senior attending physicians glide upward in comfort, the exhausted interns, who have been on their feet for 20 hours, are forced to trudge up the stairwells. It is a petty display of hierarchy that disguises hazing as keeping the elevators free for patients, while the bosses rarely take the stairs themselves. 30. If you decide you're fed up with the hospital food and want to leave early, you might get hit with the AMA threat. Doctors are trained to tell patients that if they leave against medical advice, their insurance company might legally refuse to pay the bill. While this is often a myth used to scare patients into compliance, the fear of a $100,000 invoice keeps people in beds even when they feel fine. It effectively turns the hospital into a financial hostage situation. Is it ethical to use debt as a way to keep patients under observation? 31. Healthcare professionals are strictly banned from wearing artificial nails or gel polish, and the reason is enough to make your skin crawl. Those glamorous acrylic tips act as luxury condominiums for horrifying superbugs. Even with rigorous hand washing and industrial-grade sanitizer, deadly bacteria love to camp out in the microscopic ridges where the fake nail meets the real one. Would you want your nurse serving up a side of multi-drug-resistant pathogens with your morning medication just because they wanted a flawless French manicure? 32. In many states, it is illegal for a doctor to treat a patient over a video call if they haven't seen them in person first, even for a simple rash. This telehealth restriction means a rural patient might have to drive 3 hours just for a 5-minute checkup to follow the law. It forces sick people to waste time and gas money on a commute when technology could solve the problem instantly. It prioritizes outdated regulations over patient convenience. 33. Dentists are often legally restricted from calling themselves specialists in certain fields unless they have completed specific state-approved training programs, even if they have decades of experience. A dentist might be the best in the state at implants, but if they lack the specific board certification, they must legally refer to themselves as a general dentist on their sign. It is a consumer protection law that often misleads patients into thinking a highly skilled veteran is just a novice. 34. HIPAA laws are so strict that doctors are often legally forbidden from telling a patient's own spouse about their medical condition without explicit written consent. Even if a husband is in the waiting room frantic with worry, a doctor can be sued for simply saying, "She is going to be okay," if the wife hasn't signed a release form. It turns marriage, a legal union, into a privacy violation risk, forcing spouses to jump through bureaucratic hoops during a crisis. 35. The Anti-kickback statute makes it a federal crime for doctors to receive any financial incentive for referring patients to other providers, even if it benefits the patient. This means a surgeon cannot legally accept a discount on rent from a hospital in exchange for bringing in more surgeries. While intended to prevent corruption, it often blocks innovative partnerships that could lower costs. Do you think this protects patients or just protects the profits of large hospital systems? 36. In some jurisdictions, paramedics are legally required to transport a patient to the nearest hospital, even if a specialized trauma center is just 5 minutes further away. This closest facility rule can force an ambulance to take a stroke victim to a small community hospital that lacks the necessary equipment, delaying critical care. It prioritizes geography over medical logic, potentially costing lives to follow a map instead of a treatment plan. 37. The Stark Law prohibits doctors from referring patients for designated health services to an entity with which they or an immediate family member has a financial relationship. This means a doctor cannot legally send you to an MRI center they own a small share of, even if it is the best and cheapest option in town. It assumes all doctors are greedy and will order unnecessary tests for profit, stripping them of the ability to recommend their own high-quality facilities. 38. Pharmacists in many states are legally required to hand you a paper printout of potential side effects with every single prescription, even if you have been taking the same medication for 20 years. This results in millions of tons of wasted paper annually that most patients immediately throw in the trash without reading. It is a legal requirement that ignores common sense and creates an environmental disaster in the name of informed consent. 39. The Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, EMTALA, mandates that hospitals must stabilize anyone who comes to the ER, regardless of their ability to pay. While noble, this law has created a situation where ERs are legally forced to act as primary care clinics for non-emergencies like colds and minor cuts for the uninsured. It jams up emergency rooms with non-critical cases, leading to massive wait times for actual heart attack victims. Is this a compassionate safety net or a broken system? 40. In a bizarre twist of liability law, Good Samaritan laws in some states do not always fully protect off-duty doctors who stop to help at an accident scene. If a doctor intervenes and the patient has a bad outcome, they can sometimes be sued for malpractice, whereas a layperson might be immune. This legal gray area encourages some doctors to keep driving rather than risk their career to save a stranger. Would you stop to help if it meant risking everything you worked for? 41. If you undergo a major surgery to have a limb amputated, you generally cannot take it home, no matter how much you might want to turn your own skeleton into a grim souvenir. Hospitals are legally required to classify severed body parts as hazardous pathological waste, meaning your own leg becomes the property of the biohazard incinerator the moment it is detached. There are rare religious exceptions, but for the most part, the law forbids you from walking out the front door with your own foot in a bag. If you could legally keep a part of yourself in a jar on the mantelpiece, would you actually do it? 42. Bureaucracy reaches peak insanity with ICD-10 codes, a mandatory legal system doctors must use to classify injuries for insurance billing. There are specific, legally binding codes for bitten by a turtle, sucked into a jet engine, and even burned due to water skis on fire. A doctor cannot just write bad luck. They have to hunt down the specific alphanumeric code that corresponds to struck by a parrot. It is proof that the government has hired someone to write a specific law for literally every cartoonish disaster imaginable. 43. In many states, hospitals are legally forbidden from releasing a patient who has been under sedation to a rideshare driver or a taxi. The law requires a responsible adult to act as an escort, and an Uber driver does not count because they have no legal obligation to ensure you actually get inside your house safely. If you do not have a friend or family member to pick you up, the hospital can legally hold you hostage until the anesthesia wears off completely. It is a rule that effectively penalizes single people just for needing surgery. 44. While you cannot take your appendix home, there is one bizarre exception to the medical waste rule: the placenta. In many hospitals, a mother is legally allowed to request her placenta in a bucket to take home, often for cultural rituals or to plant under a tree. It is the only human organ that bypasses the strict biohazard incinerator laws simply because enough people demanded it. It creates a strange legal loophole where biology overrides the standard safety protocols, proving that tradition can sometimes beat bureaucracy. 45. There is a strict legal mandate regarding pacemakers and cremation that sounds like a joke but is deadly serious. Doctors are legally required to remove a pacemaker from a body before cremation because the lithium battery will explode like a hand grenade in the intense heat of the furnace. This means even after death, a patient must undergo one final surgery to satisfy the law and prevent the crematorium from suffering thousands of dollars in blast damage. It turns a solemn process into a bomb disposal operation. 46. Bureaucracy frequently overrides basic biology in the radiology department, where strict protocols often require technicians to ask every patient if there is a chance they could be pregnant before an X-ray. Yes, this legally includes biological males and women in their 80s. The hospital's computer system simply will not let the technician proceed until the box is checked, leading to incredibly awkward conversations where a 70-year-old grandfather has to officially confirm he is not expecting a baby. It is a perfect example of how rigid safety rules can eliminate common sense. 47. In the aviation industry, pilots observe a sterile cockpit rule below 10,000 feet, forbidding non-essential conversation. Many hospitals have adopted this for critical phases of surgery. When the patient is being put under or the crucial incision is made, chatting about weekend plans or football scores is strictly banned. It creates an eerie silence in the room where the only sound is the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. It is intense, but wouldn't you prefer your surgeon focus on your arteries rather than their fantasy football league? 48. The dead donor rule creates a massive legal paradox for organ transplants. A surgeon cannot legally remove a vital organ for donation unless the patient is declared dead. But the heart often needs to be beating to be viable for transplant. This forces doctors to use brain death as the legal line, a concept that didn't exist until technology forced us to invent it. You are legally dead because your brain stopped, even though your body is technically still warm, pink, and functioning perfectly on a ventilator. 49. Ghost surgery is a terrifying legal loophole where the famous surgeon you hired is allowed to swap places with a resident or another doctor once you are asleep. As long as the primary surgeon is present in the building or scrubbing in for the critical parts, the law often considers the contract fulfilled. You might be paying premium rates for a star physician, but a trainee could be the one actually holding the scalpel for the majority of the time. Does it matter who cuts you as long as you wake up healed? Alright, we have covered 49 bizarre regulations and only one remains. But before we reveal the final number, it is time for the final verdict. On our list of insanity, the award for the most ridiculous rule goes to number 42, the ICD-10 codes. Simply because somewhere, a bureaucrat was paid a salary to write a specific government law for injured by a spacecraft. Do you agree with our choice, or did the ghost surgery loophole scare you more? Let us know in the comments below. And now, our final number. 50. The legal definition of death is not actually consistent across the United States, leading to a phenomenon known as jurisdictional life. In New York, doctors must accept brain death as the end of life, but in New Jersey, a family can legally reject that definition for religious reasons. This means you could be legally dead in a Manhattan hospital, but if they ambulance you across the bridge to Jersey, you are legally alive again. Your mortality depends entirely on your zip code. We've just peeled back the curtain on the bureaucratic circus that keeps every hospital running, or occasionally trips it up. It turns out that choosing the right ink or counting every tiny sponge is often treated as just as critical as the surgery itself. It is a world where the law and the lab coat rarely see eye to eye. Now tell us, have you ever caught your own doctor following a rule that made absolutely zero sense to you? Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and we will see you next time.